North of Bozeman, Montana, a sudden blizzard swallowed the narrow ridge road beneath a roaring wall of snow. Ryan Carter, a retired search and rescue diver, was driving back from a remote repair job when the road disappeared beneath his headlights. With his truck skidding dangerously close to a frozen drop, Ryan veered off and took shelter in an abandoned hunting cabin half buried in ice. Then he heard it. A faint, broken whimper. It led him to the back room, where a starving Labrador mother and 3 trembling puppies were locked inside a rusted metal crate. The door had been wired shut, the windows boarded. Someone had chosen this place so the storm would finish the job. But one tiny puppy was still breathing, barely. Ryan cut the wire open, not knowing that saving them would drag him into a truth someone had buried deep in the mountains, and force him to choose between keeping them safe or exposing the darkness that put them there. The wind didn't just howl. It hunted. It tore through the pine forest north of Bozeman like something alive, slamming against Ryan Carter's truck with violent, unpredictable force. Snow lashed sideways across the windshield, thick and blinding, erasing everything beyond a few feet of pale light. Ryan leaned forward over the wheel, his grip steady but firm. At 41, he still carried the physical presence of the man he used to be. Broad shoulders, muscular build, the kind forged through years of underwater search and rescue missions. His dark blonde hair was cropped short, though strands of gray had begun to show at the temples. A short beard framed a face weathered by cold water and harder memories. His eyes, steel blue, sharp and observant, moved constantly, scanning for danger even when there was nothing left to see. He had learned long ago, panic wasted time. And time, in conditions like this, was the one thing you never had enough of. The truck lurched as the tires lost traction for half a second. Ryan eased off the gas immediately, correcting with practiced precision. Years ago, he had navigated floodwaters and collapsing structures. Snow was different, but the principle was the same. Stay calm. Stay deliberate. The road beneath him was gone. Not hidden. Gone. The ridge line that had guided him minutes earlier had dissolved into a seamless field of white. No markings, no edges. Just the faint suggestion of where the road used to be. Ryan exhaled slowly. All right, that's enough. He didn't push forward. That was how people died out here, thinking they could outdrive a storm that didn't care whether they lived or not. Through the chaos, something dark flickered to his right. A shape, barely visible through the swirling snow. A structure. Ryan turned the wheel carefully, guiding the truck off what remained of the road. The tires crunched unevenly as he crossed frozen ground. The cabin appeared gradually, like a ghost emerging from fog. A small hunting structure, old and leaning, half buried beneath drifts of snow. No lights, no tracks, no signs of life. Perfect. He parked close to the side, killed the engine, and sat still for a moment. Silence didn't follow. The storm simply swallowed the sound of the truck, replacing it with its own relentless roar. Ryan reached behind the seat and pulled out his emergency pack. Thermal blanket, flashlight, portable heater, basic medical supplies. He had packed it years ago out of habit. Habits kept you alive. The cabin door resisted at first, swollen and frozen in place. Ryan shoved harder, shoulder braced, until the wood gave with a sharp crack. Cold air greeted him inside, stale, unmoving, untouched for years. He stepped in cautiously. The interior was simple. One main room, a rusted stove in the corner, a broken table, scattered debris. Dust layered everything. disturbed only by the drafts slipping through cracks in the walls. No footprints, no recent activity. This place had been abandoned long before the storm. Ryan moved methodically, sweeping the flashlight across every corner. It wasn't paranoia, it was training. You didn't assume safety, you confirmed it. He checked the adjoining space, a narrow hallway leading to what must have once been a storage room. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint it almost didn't exist. Ryan froze. The wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the walls. For a second he dismissed it as wood shifting, the natural groan of a dying structure. Then it came again. A thin, broken whimper. Not the wind. Alive. Ryan turned toward the sound, every sense sharpening instantly. He followed it down the hallway, boots creaking softly against the old wood. The door at the end was partially blocked by a fallen cabinet, shoved awkwardly to the side as if someone had moved it in a hurry. That alone was wrong. Ryan pushed the cabinet aside just enough to squeeze through. The beam of his flashlight cut into the darkness and stopped. A metal crate sat against the far wall. Inside it, a Labrador retriever lay curled tightly around 3 small bodies. The dog's fur was a dull golden color, matted and thin in places where malnutrition had taken its toll. Her ribs showed sharply beneath her skin. One ear drooped slightly, while the other twitched faintly at the sound of Ryan's movement. Her eyes opened. They were a deep amber, dulled by exhaustion, but still aware, still fighting. The puppies pressed against her, barely moving. Tiny, fragile, their breathing shallow and uneven. The crate door was secured with twisted steel wire. Ryan stepped closer, slow and controlled. He didn't speak at first. The mother dog let out a low, warning growl, not aggressive, just protective. It vibrated weakly in her chest, more instinct than strength. Ryan crouched down a few feet away. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. His voice was calm, steady, the same tone he had used with frightened survivors, trapped divers, panicked strangers in the worst moments of their lives. The dog watched him, didn't trust him, but didn't lunge either. Ryan's eyes moved over the crate. No bedding, a metal bowl, frozen solid. No food, no insulation, nothing to suggest anyone planned to come back. This wasn't abandonment. This was execution, just slower. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. For a moment, the cabin disappeared. He was somewhere else, years ago, cold water, flashing lights, a rescue gone wrong. His younger brother, Ethan Carter, had been with him that day. Ethan was everything Ryan wasn't. Lighter, quicker to laugh, more willing to believe that things would turn out okay. At 29, he had already built a reputation as one of the most skilled divers in their unit. And Ryan had lost him. A collapsed structure underwater, a miscalculation, a decision Ryan had made in seconds and regretted every day since. He blinked. The cabin came back. The dog was still watching him. The puppies were still breathing. Barely. Ryan reached into his pack slowly, pulling out a small pair of cutting pliers. He held them up slightly, not as a threat, just a movement the dog could track. "Easy. Just let me help." The growl faded. Not gone, but weaker. Ryan moved closer. Every motion deliberate, every second earned. The wire snapped with a sharp metallic crack. The dog flinched, but didn't attack. Ryan opened the crate door slowly, then stopped. He didn't reach inside. Not yet. He had learned that, too. Sometimes the first step wasn't action. It was permission. He sat back slightly, giving the dog space. "You decide," he murmured. Minutes passed. The storm howled outside. Inside, the air felt suspended, fragile. One of the puppies let out a faint, desperate whimper. The mother shifted slightly, trying to cover it, but she didn't have the strength. Ryan saw it immediately. That one wouldn't last long, not without help. The dog's eyes met his again. Something changed. Not trust, but acceptance. Ryan moved. Carefully, he reached in and lifted the weakest puppy. It weighed almost nothing in his hands, too light. He wrapped it in a thermal cloth, rubbing gently to stimulate breathing. "Come on, stay with me." The puppy's chest trembled. A pause. Then, a shallow breath. Ryan let out a quiet breath of his own. Good. That's it. Behind him, the storm raged on. But inside that broken cabin, something had shifted. For the first time that night, it wasn't just survival. It was a fight. And Ryan Carter had stepped into it, whether he wanted to or not. Ryan didn't rush the next step. He had learned that survival wasn't just about speed. It was about understanding what you were walking into before it swallowed you whole. The weakest puppy lay wrapped inside his thermal cloth, its breathing still shallow but steadier now. The other two puppies shifted weakly against their mother, small bodies pressing together for warmth. The Labrador, still unnamed, still wary, kept her amber eyes locked on him, tracking every movement with quiet intensity. Up close, Ryan could see more of her condition. Patches of fur thinned from malnutrition, faint scars along her hind legs, and a stiffness in the way she held her back, as if prolonged confinement had worn her down physically as much as starvation had. She wasn't just abandoned. She had been used. Ryan stood slowly, scanning the room again. This time not as a shelter, but as a scene. He angled the flashlight toward the crate. The metal wasn't just rusted. It had been reinforced recently. The twisted wire binding the latch was newer, cleaner than the cage itself. Someone had taken the time to make sure that door would not open again. His jaw tightened slightly. That wasn't panic. It was calculation. He stepped back, sweeping the light across the floor. The wooden boards were uneven, dust layered thick in some places, but near the door, something had disturbed it. A faint pattern. Not fresh, not sharp, but visible enough. Ryan crouched, brushing lightly across the surface with his gloved hand. Tire tracks. Partial, compressed into the wood grain near the entrance, where mud or snow had once been dragged inside before freezing and drying. They didn't belong to him. He hadn't driven that far in. And they weren't random. They had direction, leading inward, stopping, then turning back out. Whoever had come here had not gotten stuck. They had left. The realization settled in with a weight that felt heavier than the storm pressing against the cabin walls. "You weren't forgotten," Ryan muttered quietly, glancing toward the dog. "You were left." The Labrador didn't respond, but her gaze didn't waver. Outside, the wind screamed harder, rattling the cabin like something trying to break in. Ryan moved toward the boarded window, pushing aside a loose plank just enough to peer out. Snow had already begun to erase the world. Whatever tracks had existed outside were gone now, swallowed by white. The storm had done exactly what it was meant to do. Clean everything. Except one thing. Inside this cabin, someone had made a mistake. Ryan turned back toward the crate, then to the rest of the room. If someone had planned this, They hadn't expected anyone to come here. That meant anything left behind might still be here. He moved deeper into the room, checking corners, under debris, behind the broken cabinet. Most of it was useless. Rotted wood, scraps of cloth, rusted tools. But then, something caught the beam of his flashlight. A faint, metallic glint near the base of the wall. Ryan stepped closer and knelt down, pushing aside a piece of torn insulation. His fingers closed around a thin chain. He lifted it slowly into the light. A necklace. Simple. Worn. Not expensive, but not trash either. At the end hung a small, oval-shaped tag. Ryan wiped it with his sleeve. The engraving became visible. Hollow Creek Kennels. He stared at it for a moment. The name didn't immediately trigger recognition, but it didn't feel random either. Places like that, breeding operations, training facilities, they existed on the edges of regulation. Some legitimate, some not. Ryan turned the tag over. There were scratches along the back, as if someone had tried to scrape something off. A number, maybe, or a secondary marking. It had been deliberately damaged. That was enough. He slipped the necklace into his jacket pocket. Evidence. Even if he didn't know yet what it proved. Behind him, one of the puppies let out a weak sound. Ryan turned quickly. The smallest one, the one he had revived, was trembling again, its body fighting to regulate heat. The mother shifted, attempting to reposition herself, but her strength was still limited. Ryan moved back to them, adjusting the thermal wrap and placing a second heat pack beneath the cloth, careful not to burn the fragile skin. "Stay with me," he murmured again, more to himself this time. The dog watched closely. Her growl didn't return. That was something. Ryan sat back on his heels, studying her more carefully now. She wasn't just protecting her pups. She was evaluating him. Deciding. That kind of intelligence didn't come from nowhere. It came from training, from exposure, from being around humans long enough to understand patterns, good and bad. "You came from somewhere," he said quietly. The dog's ear twitched. Ryan exhaled slowly and leaned back against the wall, his mind working through the pieces. A remote cabin, a reinforced cage, a deliberate concealment, tracks that came and went before the storm. And now, a name. Hollow Creek Kennels. This wasn't random cruelty. It was controlled, planned, which meant one thing. Someone out there knew exactly what they had done and believed the storm had buried it. Ryan looked down at the puppy in his hands, then back at the dog. "They thought no one would find you." Outside, the storm answered with another violent gust, shaking the entire structure. But inside, something had shifted again. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was evidence. And Ryan Carter had just become part of something far bigger than a storm. The temperature inside the cabin didn't rise. It only stopped falling. Ryan Carter understood the difference immediately. The small fire he managed to coax out of the rusted stove, fed with splintered wood and scraps torn from broken furniture, wasn't enough to warm the space. It was only enough to slow the cold from taking everything. He sat close to it, one knee bent, the other stretched slightly outward, positioning his body between the weak heat and the open room where the dog and her puppies lay. The Labrador hadn't moved far from where he first found her, but she had shifted just enough to keep all three puppies pressed tightly against her chest. Her breathing was still shallow, but more stable than before. Ryan kept watching it. He always watched breathing. It told the truth faster than anything else. At 41, Ryan still moved like a man trained for emergencies. Efficient, controlled. But the years had added something quieter to him. A hesitation. Not weakness. Memory. His hands, rough from years of water rescues and mechanical work, moved carefully as he adjusted the thermal cloth around the smallest puppy. The little one, he hadn't named it yet, was still the most fragile. Its chest rose unevenly, pauses too long between breaths. Ryan leaned closer, placing 2 fingers lightly along its side, counting. 1, 2. Pause. Too long. His jaw tightened. No, not this time, he muttered under his breath. The words slipped out before he could stop them. The Labrador's head lifted slightly at the sound. Her amber eyes fixed on him again, not with suspicion this time, but something closer to awareness. She was beginning to understand his role in this space. Not a threat, not yet trusted, but necessary. Ryan adjusted one of the heat packs again, wrapping it tighter in cloth before sliding it closer to the puppy's side. He had seen hypothermia enough times to know the danger of rushing warmth. Too fast, and the body shuts down. Too slow, and it never recovers. Balance. Everything was balance. The storm outside pressed harder against the cabin walls, wind screaming through every crack like it was trying to tear the place apart. The sound filled the silence between each fragile breath in the room. Ryan barely noticed it anymore. His world had narrowed to the space in front of him. The puppy's breathing faltered again. A longer pause this time. Ryan reacted instantly, lifting the small body into his hands. It was frighteningly light. He wrapped it tighter in the cloth and began rubbing gently but firmly along its sides, generating friction, stimulating circulation. "Stay with me. Come on," he said quietly, his voice low but urgent. He didn't realize how much tension had crept into it until he heard it himself. The puppy didn't respond. For a moment, everything went still. Too still. Ryan's chest tightened, and suddenly he wasn't in the cabin anymore. He was underwater. Cold. Dark. Visibility near zero. A collapsed steel beam pinning a diver beneath it. Ethan. His younger brother's face, mask cracked, eyes wide behind the glass, still burned into his memory with painful clarity. Ryan had reached him. He had gotten there, but not fast enough. The decision to redirect resources, to stabilize another section first, it had made sense in the moment. It had been the right call. That's what they told him afterward. That's what the reports said. But it didn't change the outcome. Ethan had died 30 feet away from him. Ryan blinked hard, forcing the memory back. "Not again," he said, louder now. His hands moved faster, more insistent, rubbing warmth into the puppy's tiny body. He cleared its airway gently, using the edge of the cloth to wipe moisture from its nose. He leaned closer, watching for any sign. Seconds stretched. Then, a twitch. Small, barely there. Ryan froze for half a second, then leaned in again. Yeah, that's it," he murmured. Another breath. Weak, but real. The puppy's chest rose again, slightly stronger this time. Ryan exhaled slowly, tension releasing from his shoulders in a controlled wave. He didn't celebrate. He never did. Not until it was certain. He carefully lowered the puppy back against the mother's body, positioning it between its siblings where the combined heat would help stabilize it. The Labrador shifted slightly, adjusting instinctively to cover the small body. Her nose brushed briefly against Ryan's wrist as he withdrew his hand. The contact was light, accidental, but it lingered. Ryan stilled for a moment, surprised by it. Then he leaned back again, resting against the wall beside the stove. His muscles ached now. He hadn't noticed it building, but exhaustion had a way of creeping in when adrenaline began to fade. He tilted his head back slightly, closing his eyes for just a second. Not sleep, just a pause. The storm filled the silence again. Somewhere in the distance, wood cracked sharply, either from the cold or the strain of the wind. The cabin held. Barely. Ryan opened his eyes again, forcing himself to stay present. He reached for his pack, pulling out a small canteen. The water inside was cold, but not frozen yet. He poured a small amount into the metal lid and slid it carefully toward the dog, stopping short of her reach. "Your move," he said quietly. The Labrador watched the water, then him. Her body remained still for a long moment. Then, slowly, she extended her neck, inching forward. Every movement was cautious, deliberate, as if expecting the opportunity to be taken away. Her tongue touched the surface once, then again. She drank only a little before pulling back, conserving energy even in that moment. Ryan nodded slightly. Good. He leaned his head back again, eyes scanning the ceiling, the walls, the door. Always checking, always listening. The necklace in his pocket felt heavier now. Hollow Creek Kennels. The name circled in his mind, threading itself through everything he had seen. This wasn't random. This wasn't survival alone. But that part, the truth behind it, could wait. It had to wait. Because right now, nothing mattered more than keeping 5 fragile lives breathing until morning. And morning, Ryan knew, was still a long way off. Morning didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, turning the pitch-black cabin into a dim gray outline, revealing shapes that had survived the night. The storm had weakened, not gone, but no longer raging with the same violent force. The wind now came in long, tired gusts, brushing snow across the windows instead of trying to tear them apart. Ryan Carter hadn't slept. He remained seated against the wall near the stove, his posture slightly slumped, but his awareness intact. Years of training had conditioned him to function on minimal rest, but fatigue was still there, settling deep into his shoulders, behind his eyes. Across the room, the Labrador lay with her puppies pressed tightly against her. All 3 were still alive. That fact alone felt like a victory Ryan refused to fully acknowledge yet. He pushed himself to his feet slowly, joints stiff from the cold and the long night. The fire in the stove had burned low, reduced to glowing embers. He added more wood carefully, coaxing the heat back to life. Outside, visibility had improved just enough to make movement possible. Ryan stepped toward the door, opening it slightly. The cold air rushed in immediately, sharp and biting. Snow blanketed everything, but the worst of the storm had passed. It was time to move. He turned back toward the dogs. The Labrador watched him, her head lifting slightly. She looked stronger than she had the night before, though still far from stable. Her amber eyes followed him closely. Ryan crouched down again, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "We're getting out of here," he said quietly. The words were more for himself than for her. He prepared the transport method quickly but carefully, lining a plastic storage crate from his truck with thermal blankets, adding heat packs, making sure there were no sharp edges. When he returned, the dog tensed slightly as he approached, but she didn't growl. progress. Ryan slid a blanket beneath her body slowly, allowing her to adjust. Easy. I've got you. She resisted for half a second, instinct fighting exhaustion, then gave in. He lifted her carefully, keeping the puppies close against her. Her weight was less than it should have been. Too light for a dog her size. That confirmed what he already suspected. Malnutrition. Not recent, prolonged. The drive into Bozeman took longer than it should have. Roads were partially cleared, but still dangerous. Ryan kept his speed low, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching back to check the crate behind him. The smallest puppy made a faint sound once. Ryan's grip tightened slightly, but he didn't accelerate. He had learned that urgency, unchecked, caused mistakes. The veterinary clinic sat just outside town, a modest building with a weathered wooden sign that read Mitchell Veterinary Services. The lights were on. That was enough. Ryan pulled up and stepped out quickly, opening the back door and lifting the crate. The warmth inside the clinic hit him almost immediately as he pushed through the entrance. "Hello?" His voice carried through the quiet space. A moment later, a woman emerged from a side hallway, already pulling on a pair of gloves. She moved with purpose, quick, efficient, no wasted motion. Sarah Mitchell was in her late 30s, medium height with a lean, practical build. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a low, slightly messy ponytail, strands falling loose near her face. Her green eyes were sharp and observant, the kind that assessed situations in seconds. There was a steadiness to her, calm under pressure, but not detached. Someone who had seen enough to know when something wasn't right. "What have you got?" she asked, stepping forward. No hesitation, no small talk. Ryan set the crate down gently. "Found them in an abandoned cabin north of the ridge, locked in a cage." Sarah's expression didn't change dramatically, but something in her eyes sharpened. "How long?" "Long enough." She nodded once. "Let's get them in the exam room." She didn't wait for more explanation. Together they moved the dogs into a heated space. Sarah worked methodically, starting with the mother. She spoke softly as she examined her, not for Ryan's benefit, but for the dog's. "You're okay. We've got you." Her hands moved across the dog's body, checking ribs, joints, hydration. She paused briefly along the abdomen, then continued without comment. Ryan watched closely. He noticed everything she didn't say. After several minutes, Sarah stepped back slightly, pulling off one glove. "She's been underfed for weeks," she said finally. "Maybe longer." Ryan folded his arms. "That obvious?" "It's not just weight," Sarah replied. "Muscle loss, coat condition, dehydration patterns." "This isn't a few missed meals." She moved to the puppies next, checking each one quickly but thoroughly. When she reached the smallest, she lingered longer, listening to its breathing. "This one's had a rough start," she said quietly, "but it's fighting." Ryan nodded once. "Yeah, it is." Sarah placed the puppy back gently, then stood up, her expression shifting slightly, more focused now, more analytical. "You said they were locked in a cage?" "Wired shut." Sarah exhaled slowly, then turned toward a cabinet, pulling out a scanner. "Let's check something." She ran the device slowly along the dog's shoulders and neck. The machine beeped once, then went silent. She tried again, covering a wider area. Nothing. "No microchip," she said. "Or it's been removed." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Removed?" Sarah looked at him, It happens. Not legally, but it happens. She paused, then added, especially in operations that don't want traceability. Ryan reached into his jacket and pulled out the necklace, placing it on the metal table. Sarah looked down at it. Her reaction was immediate, but subtle. Her posture stiffened just slightly. You recognize it, Ryan said. Sarah didn't answer right away. She picked up the tag, turning it in her fingers. Hollow Creek Kennels, she read quietly. A beat of silence passed. Yeah, she said finally. I've heard of them. Ryan watched her closely. What kind of place is it? Sarah set the tag down carefully. On paper, licensed breeding and training facility. She met his eyes. In reality, I've had suspicions. Ryan didn't speak. He let her continue. Sarah leaned back slightly against the counter, arms crossing. About a year ago, I started seeing dogs from that area, clients bringing them in. Repeated issues. Genetic problems that shouldn't have passed screening. Malnutrition that didn't match the paperwork. You reported it? Ryan asked. I tried, Sarah said. Her tone stayed calm, but there was a trace of frustration beneath it. But I didn't have enough. No direct evidence. Everything was clean on the surface. She glanced toward the Labrador. Until now. Ryan followed her gaze. The dog lay quietly, her breathing steady under the warmth of the room. For the first time since he had found her, she looked like she might actually recover. But what had been done to her? That was something else entirely. Sarah stepped forward again, placing a hand gently along the dog's side. There's more, she said. Ryan looked at her. What? Sarah hesitated for half a second, then spoke. She's been bred recently. Ryan's expression hardened slightly. How recent? Within the last few weeks, Sarah replied. Which means those puppies weren't supposed to exist here. The room fell quiet. The storm outside had faded to nothing now, replaced by a stillness that felt heavier in its own way. Ryan looked at the necklace again, then back at the dog. This wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just abandonment. It was a system. And whatever Hollow Creek Kennels really was, it had just made a mistake. One that hadn't been buried by the storm. The clinic had grown quieter by late afternoon, but the tension inside it had only sharpened. Ryan Carter stood near the back wall of the exam room, arms folded, watching as Sarah Mitchell finished updating her notes. The Labrador lay on a padded surface beneath a heat lamp, her breathing steadier now, though her body still carried the exhaustion of prolonged neglect. The 3 puppies had been moved into a small, enclosed warming unit beside her, their tiny forms rising and falling in fragile rhythm. Ryan hadn't taken his eyes off them for more than a few seconds at a time. That was when the front door opened. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the space immediately. Sarah looked up first. Ryan turned a second later. Footsteps followed, measured, deliberate, unhurried. Not the kind of movement someone made when they were worried. More like someone who expected to be in control of the situation the moment they walked into it. The man who entered didn't rush. He stepped into the doorway of the exam room as if he belonged there, his gaze moving quickly across the space before settling on the dog. Daniel Brooks was in his early 50s, tall and lean, with a posture that suggested discipline more than strength. His dark gray coat was tailored, clean despite the weather outside, and his boots showed no sign of the snow Ryan had driven through. His hair, black streaked with silver, was combed back neatly, and his face carried a controlled, almost polite expression. But his eyes gave him away. Cold, assessing. The kind of eyes that didn't react, they calculated. "There she is," he said calmly. His voice was smooth, measured, with just enough authority to sound practiced. "I was told she'd been brought here." Sarah stepped slightly forward, placing herself between him and the table. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone neutral but firm. Brooks glanced at her briefly, then back at the dog. "I'm here for my property." The word landed in the room like something heavy. Ryan didn't move, but his attention sharpened instantly. "Property?" Sarah repeated. Brooks nodded once. "The Labrador, and her litter." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder, setting it on the counter with controlled precision. "Registered under Hollow Creek Kennels. That's my operation." Ryan pushed himself off the wall slowly, stepping forward just enough to make his presence unavoidable. "You're saying that dog belongs to you?" Brooks finally looked at him directly. There was no surprise in his expression, only recognition that someone else had entered the equation. "I am," he said. Ryan held his gaze. "Funny, because I found her locked in a cage in an abandoned cabin." A pause, not long, but noticeable. Brooks didn't react the way most people would. No shock, no denial. Just a slight narrowing of his eyes, as if recalculating something. "Then someone mishandled the situation," he replied smoothly. "That's unfortunate." Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Mishandled?" she said. "She was starving. No chip, no food, no access to water." Brooks turned toward her again, his tone still calm. "Doctor, I run a licensed facility. Animals are transported, relocated, sometimes placed in temporary holding depending on conditions. Without full context, it's easy to misinterpret what you've seen." Ryan let out a quiet breath through his nose. "You wired the cage shut?" Brooks didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up the necklace from the counter, the one Ryan had found, and turned it between his fingers. "That shouldn't have been left behind," he said quietly. That was it. Not a denial. Not even an attempt to pretend. Just a correction. Ryan took one step closer. "So you admit it's yours?" Brooks placed the necklace back down carefully. "I'm saying it belongs to my facility," he replied. "And therefore, so does the animal." Sarah shook her head slightly. "That's not how this works." "It is, actually," Brooks said, his tone sharpening just a fraction. "Ownership documentation, breeding records, licensing, everything is in order." He tapped the folder lightly. "You're holding assets that legally belong to me." Ryan's hands tightened slightly at his sides. "Assets," he repeated. Brooks didn't respond to that. Instead, his attention shifted briefly toward the puppies. "I wasn't aware she had delivered," he added. "That complicates things." The room went still again. Sarah stepped forward another inch. "You didn't know?" she asked. Brooks met her gaze. "Not until now." Ryan watched him closely. Every word, every pause. Nothing about the man felt uncertain. That meant one thing. He was either telling the truth very well, or he had already decided what version of it he was going to use. Before Ryan could respond, another sound came from the hallway. Softer this time. Hesitant. Someone else had entered. But unlike Brooks, this presence carried uncertainty. A young woman appeared at the doorway, stopping just short of stepping fully inside. She looked like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. Lily Harper was in her mid-20s, slight in build, with pale skin and light brown hair pulled into a loose, uneven ponytail. She wore a thick jacket that didn't quite fit her properly, sleeves slightly too long, as if it had been borrowed or bought second-hand. Her eyes, blue, wide, and restless, moved quickly between Ryan, Sarah, and Brooks before settling on the dog. Something in her expression changed when she saw it. Recognition and guilt. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly. Brooks didn't turn immediately. When he did, his expression remained controlled, but there was a subtle shift in his posture. Awareness. "Lily," he said, "you shouldn't be here." She swallowed slightly. I heard where you were going." Her voice wavered just a little, but she didn't step back. Ryan watched her carefully now. This was different. She wasn't like Brooks. She didn't belong to his world the same way. "You worked for him," Ryan said. It wasn't a question. Lily nodded once, slowly. "I used to." Brooks exhaled quietly. "This isn't your concern anymore." Lily's eyes flicked toward him, then back to the dog. "It should be," she said, softer this time, but steadier. Sarah stepped closer to her, not blocking, but present. "What do you know?" Lily hesitated. Ryan could see it, the internal conflict. Fear pulling one way, conscience the other. Brooks spoke before she could answer. "You don't need to involve yourself in this," he said calmly. "You've already made your decision when you left." That landed. Lily flinched slightly, but she didn't step away. Instead, she looked directly at Ryan. "That cabin," she said quietly. "It wasn't for holding." Ryan didn't move. "What was it for?" Lily's voice dropped even lower. "For getting rid of them." Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. Brooks didn't react outwardly, but the stillness in him changed. It became sharper, controlled in a different way. Ryan felt something settle into place inside him. The storm, the cage, the missing chip, the necklace. It all aligned now. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't mismanagement. It was deliberate. And the man standing in front of him had expected the snow to bury it. Brooks adjusted his coat slightly, his voice returning to that same calm tone. "You're making assumptions," he said. But it didn't carry the same weight anymore, because now someone else had seen it too. The clinic didn't return to normal after Daniel Brooks left. It couldn't. The air itself seemed to hold on to what had just happened, like something unresolved lingering just beneath the surface. Ryan Carter remained in the exam room long after the door had closed behind Brooks, his posture still, but his mind moving fast. At 41, Ryan had spent years reading situations where danger didn't announce itself clearly. And this was one of those moments. Brooks hadn't argued. He hadn't threatened. He had simply observed, adjusted, and left. That was worse. Sarah Mitchell stood near the counter, arms folded, her expression thoughtful but tight. She wasn't rattled, but she was alert now in a way that went beyond veterinary concern. Across the room, Lily Harper sat on a metal stool, shoulders slightly hunched, her hands clasped tightly together. She hadn't moved much since Brooks left, as if staying too still might make her less visible to whatever consequences might follow. Lily looked younger now than she had when she walked in. Fear had a way of stripping away whatever confidence remained. "He's not going to stop," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan turned his head toward her. "No," he replied. "He's not." Sarah stepped closer, lowering her tone. "Then we need to make sure he doesn't get the chance." Ryan nodded once, but before he could respond, the front bell rang again. This time, it wasn't subtle. It was firm, deliberate. Someone entering with purpose. Ryan's attention shifted instantly toward the hallway. His body reacted before his thoughts fully caught up, straightening slightly, shoulders tightening, weight shifting forward. Sarah noticed it too. "Stay here," she said quietly, though she was already moving toward the front. Ryan followed anyway. He didn't argue. He just moved. The man standing in the reception area looked official at first glance. Mid-40s, average height, stocky build. He wore a dark green jacket with a patch on the shoulder that resembled a county animal control insignia. His hair was short, sandy blonde, and his face carried the kind of neutral expression people used when they didn't want to be questioned. He held a clipboard in one hand, pen tucked behind his ear. "Animal control," he said as Sarah approached. "We received a report about distressed animals brought in this morning." His voice was flat, rehearsed, too smooth. Ryan stopped a few feet behind Sarah, watching. The man didn't look at him right away. That was the first sign. People in real positions like that, real authority, they scanned rooms automatically. This one didn't. He focused too narrowly. "We didn't make a report," Sarah said. Her tone was polite, but controlled. The man nodded as if expecting that answer. "Anonymous call," he replied. "Happens all the time. Just need to verify the condition of the animals and arrange transfer if necessary." Transfer. The word landed wrong. Ryan stepped forward slightly. "Transfer to where?" he asked. The man finally looked at him. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not recognition, but irritation. "County holding facility," he said. "Standard procedure." Ryan held his gaze. "Name of the facility?" A pause, small, but real. "You can find that in the report," the man replied, tapping the clipboard. Ryan didn't move. "I'm asking you." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "Look, I'm just doing my job." "Then do it right," Ryan said calmly. The room went still again. Sarah glanced between them, her instincts catching up now. Something wasn't right. Lily had stepped into the hallway behind them, her eyes locked on the man. And then it happened. Recognition. Her expression changed instantly, fear sharpening into certainty. "He's not county," she said, louder than she meant to. The man turned toward her quickly, too quickly. That confirmed it. Ryan moved before the situation could escalate further, stepping directly between the man and the hallway. Not aggressive, but blocking. Controlled. "You want to try that again?" Ryan asked. The man's posture shifted. The calm, neutral act dropped just slightly at the edges. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said. "Animals get moved. That's how it works." "Not today," Ryan replied. Sarah stepped forward now, her voice firm. "I'm calling the sheriff." That changed the equation. The man hesitated, calculating risk. Ryan saw it clearly. This wasn't someone willing to push past a certain point. Not here. Not in public. The man exhaled sharply, lowering the clipboard. "Fine," he said. "Have it your way." He turned and walked out without another word. No argument, no escalation, just a clean exit. Ryan didn't follow. He watched through the window as the man got into a plain white pickup truck parked out front. No official markings, no county plates. The engine started, and within seconds, it was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Sarah turned toward Ryan slowly. "That was him," she said. Ryan nodded. "Yeah." Lily stepped closer now, her hands trembling slightly. "I've seen him before," she said. "At the facility." Ryan looked at her. "Working for Brooks?" She nodded. "He handles transport. Or disposal." The word barely came out. Sarah's expression darkened. "Disposal of what?" Lily swallowed. "Dogs that don't meet breeding standards," she said. "Health issues, behavioral problems, anything that affects profit." Ryan felt something cold settle deeper inside him. Not surprise, confirmation. "And the cabin?" he asked. Lily nodded slowly. "One of the places they use. Remote. Hard to trace. Weather does the rest." Sarah turned away for a moment, processing. Then she looked back. "You said you had information," she said to Lily. Lily hesitated again, but this time she didn't retreat. She reached into her jacket and pulled out her phone. "I copied files before I left," she said. "Records, internal logs, breeding data." She handed it to Ryan. On the screen were images, documents, spreadsheets, message threads, names, dates, notes. Some marked with codes, others more direct. Rejected stock. Non-viable. Remove before inspection. Ryan scrolled slowly, his expression unreadable. "This is enough," Sarah said quietly. "This is more than enough." Ryan handed the phone back to Lily. "You kept this. Why?" he asked. Lily looked down at it. "At first, to protect myself," she said. "Then I realized someone needed to know." Ryan studied her for a second, then nodded once. Outside, the sky had cleared completely now. The storm was gone, but what it had uncovered was just beginning. Brooks had made his move, and now, so had they. The courthouse in Gallatin County wasn't imposing, but it carried a quiet weight that Ryan Carter recognized immediately. It wasn't the architecture, it was the purpose. Decisions made inside these walls didn't rely on instinct or speed. They relied on patience, evidence, and the willingness to let the truth stand on its own. Ryan stood near the back of the small courtroom, hands resting loosely at his sides, shoulders squared but not rigid. At 41, he had faced life-threatening situations before, but this felt different. There was no immediate action to take, no physical danger to confront. This was slower, controlled, and in some ways, harder. Across the room, Daniel Brooks sat at the defense table, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. He wore a charcoal suit now, replacing the coat from the clinic, but nothing else about him had changed. His presence still carried that same calculated stillness. Beside him sat his attorney, a thin man in his late 40s named Richard Halden, sharp-featured, pale, with narrow eyes that missed nothing. Halden's reputation in the county was well known. Precise, methodical, and exceptionally good at dismantling weak arguments. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. At the front of the room stood Assistant District Attorney Claire Donovan, a woman in her early 40s with a composed, focused demeanor. She had auburn hair pulled neatly into a low bun, and her posture carried a quiet authority that came from years of experience rather than force. Claire wasn't theatrical. She was deliberate. Every movement, every question had purpose behind it. Ryan had met her briefly the day before. She had asked fewer questions than he expected, but each one had gone straight to the core of what mattered. "Stick to what you saw," she had told him, "not what you think it means. That's my job." Now, as proceedings began, Ryan watched her step forward, placing a stack of documents on the table. Sarah Mitchell sat behind him in the second row, arms crossed loosely, her presence steady but unobtrusive. Lily Harper sat beside her, shoulders tense, fingers gripping the edge of her seat. She looked smaller here than she had at the clinic, like the weight of what she had chosen to do had finally settled in. The judge, an older man named Harold Green, entered quietly, his expression neutral but alert. In his 60s, Green carried the calm authority of someone who had spent decades separating fact from noise. His gray hair was cut short, his posture upright despite his age, and his voice, when he spoke, was firm without needing to be loud. The case began without drama. No raised voices, no sudden accusations, just facts, presented one piece at a time. Claire Donovan opened with the timeline. The storm, the abandoned cabin, the discovery. Ryan listened as his own experience was laid out in structured form, transformed from a chaotic night into a sequence of events that could be examined, questioned, and tested. Then came the evidence. Photographs Ryan had taken at the cabin, clear, time-stamped, showing the wired cage, the frozen water bowl, the blocked door. Sarah's medical reports followed, detailing the dog's condition: prolonged malnutrition, dehydration, recent forced breeding. Each detail added weight, building something solid enough to stand on. Brooks's attorney responded exactly as expected. Richard Halden didn't attack the evidence directly. He reframed it. "No direct witness to the alleged abandonment," he said calmly. "No definitive proof of when the animal was placed in that location. No confirmation that my client personally authorized or carried out these actions." His voice remained steady, controlled. "We are dealing with assumptions built around unfortunate circumstances." Ryan felt the argument for what it was. Not wrong, but incomplete. That was how it worked here. Truth wasn't enough. It had to be proven. Claire didn't interrupt. She waited. Then she called her first witness. "Ryan Carter." Ryan stepped forward. The room seemed to narrow slightly as he took his place. Not pressure, focus. He raised his right hand, took the oath, then sat. Claire approached slowly. "Mr. Carter," she began, "can you describe what you found in the cabin?" Ryan didn't rush. "A Labrador retriever and 3 puppies," he said, "locked in a metal crate. The door was wired shut. No food. Water frozen solid." "Did you observe any signs that this was accidental?" "No." "Why?" Ryan paused for a fraction of a second, not to hesitate, but to choose his words carefully. "Because of the wire. It wasn't broken or damaged. It was secured deliberately, and the cabin was set up to hide them." Halden stood for cross-examination. He moved with a quiet confidence, adjusting his glasses slightly before speaking. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you are not a veterinarian, correct?" "No." "You are not a law enforcement officer?" "No." "So your conclusions about intent are based on personal interpretation?" Ryan met his gaze. "My conclusions are based on what I saw." Halden nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the answer while preparing the next question. "And what you saw occurred during a severe storm, under limited visibility, after you had been driving for hours?" "Yes." "So it is possible that your interpretation of the situation could be influenced by those conditions?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. He could feel the old instinct rising, the need to defend, to push back harder. But Claire's words echoed in his mind. "Stick to what you saw, not what you think it means." "What I saw," Ryan said calmly, "was a cage wired shut. That doesn't change in a storm." A pause followed, small but enough. Halden stepped back. Next came Sarah. Her testimony was clinical, precise. She didn't speculate. She didn't exaggerate. She described the dog's condition in terms that left little room for doubt. Then Lily. She hesitated at first, her voice unsteady as she took the stand. But once she began, something shifted. She spoke about Hollow Creek kennels, about the records, the internal language, the way animals were categorized. "Non-viable," she said quietly. "That's what they called them." Claire introduced the data Lily had provided. Documents, messages, internal logs. Patterns began to emerge, clearer now, harder to dismiss. Brooks remained still throughout it all, but Ryan noticed something change, not in his posture, but in his eyes. For the first time, there was tension there, controlled, but present. The case wasn't decided that day. That wasn't how it worked. But something important had happened. The narrative Brooks had relied on, the one where everything could be explained away, had begun to fracture. When the session ended, Ryan stepped outside into the cold afternoon air. The sky was clear now, the storm completely gone. Sarah joined him a moment later. "You did good," she said simply. Ryan nodded once. "I didn't do it alone." Sarah gave him a small, knowing look. "No, you didn't." Lily stepped out last, slower, uncertain. Ryan turned toward her. "You stayed," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. "Yeah." He studied her for a second, then said, "That matters." For a long time, Ryan had believed that responsibility meant carrying everything himself. That if something went wrong, it was because he hadn't done enough, hadn't moved fast enough, hadn't controlled enough. But standing there now, he could see something different. This wasn't one person's fight. It never had been. And maybe, for the first time, he was starting to understand that. The final hearing didn't take long. It didn't need to. By the time the courtroom filled that morning, most of the arguments had already been made, examined, and stripped down to what mattered. Ryan Carter stood near the same place he had during the previous session. Posture steady, expression calm. But something in him had shifted. He wasn't bracing anymore. He was waiting. Daniel Brooks sat at the defense table, but the confidence he had carried before had changed. It wasn't gone, but it had narrowed, sharpened into something more contained. He still wore the same controlled expression, but the space around him felt different now. Smaller. The illusion of control had limits. Judge Harold Green entered, took his seat, and began without unnecessary delay. The tone of the room was quiet, focused. No spectacle, just conclusion. Assistant District Attorney Claire Donovan stood and summarized the case one final time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She simply aligned the evidence. Ryan's discovery, Sarah's medical findings, Lily's testimony, the internal records, the attempted retrieval under false authority. Each piece, on its own, could have been questioned. Together, they formed something harder to ignore. Richard Halden responded as expected, but there was less room now. His arguments remained precise, but the gaps had narrowed. When Judge Green spoke, the room stilled completely. The court finds sufficient evidence of deliberate neglect, unlawful disposal practices, and obstruction of investigation, he said, his voice even. Hollow Creek Kennels is to be suspended indefinitely, pending full review. Ownership claims by Mr. Brooks are hereby revoked. A pause, then, further charges will proceed under state law. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was final. Ryan exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders in a way he hadn't fully noticed until it was gone. Brooks didn't react outwardly. He gathered his papers with the same measured control he had shown from the beginning. But as he stood, his eyes moved once, briefly, toward Ryan. Not anger, not apology, something closer to recognition. Then he turned and left. Outside the courthouse, the air was warmer than it had been weeks ago. Winter was retreating, leaving behind damp ground and the first hints of thaw. Snow still clung to the edges of the mountains, but the town itself had begun to move again. Ryan stood at the top of the steps, looking out over the street without saying anything. Sarah Mitchell joined him a moment later, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. She didn't speak right away either. She didn't need to. After a moment, she said, "It's done." Ryan nodded once. "Yeah." Lily Harper stepped out behind them, slower, as if still adjusting to the idea that she could leave without looking over her shoulder. She paused beside them, glancing back at the courthouse doors. "I didn't think it would actually work," she admitted quietly. Sarah gave her a small smile. "It doesn't always," she said. "But this time, it did." Ryan looked at Lily. "You made that happen." Lily shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "I just stopped pretending I didn't see it." Ryan didn't argue. Sometimes that was enough. The clinic felt different when they returned, not tense anymore, but lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had been set right. The Labrador lay near the window, her coat cleaner now, fuller. Strength had returned to her body in small but steady ways. Her movements were no longer slow with exhaustion. They were measured, aware, alive in a different way. Ryan had started calling her Nova. It had come naturally, somewhere between the second and third day after the trial. A new start. A name that didn't belong to anyone else. She responded to it now, lifting her head slightly when he entered. The puppies had grown too, stronger, louder, their movements less fragile, more certain. One of them, the smallest, the one Ryan had pulled back from the edge that night, remained different. Still energetic, still curious, but with a slight hesitation in its breathing after too much movement. Sarah had explained it clearly. "Residual damage," she had said. "It may never completely go away." Ryan had nodded. He understood that more than most. Some things healed. Others stayed. Quiet reminders of what had happened. The adoption process moved forward over the next few weeks. Carefully, thoroughly, not rushed. 2 families were selected. People with experience, with space, with the kind of patience that couldn't be faked. The first was a couple named Daniel and Grace Whitaker. Daniel was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with a calm, grounded presence that came from years working as a park ranger. Grace, slightly younger, had a quiet warmth to her, soft-spoken, attentive, with a way of letting animals approach her on their own terms. They didn't reach for the puppy immediately. They sat, waited, let it come to them. Ryan noticed that. It mattered. The second adoption went to a woman named Carmen Ruiz, a mountain search coordinator in her 40s. Lean, strong, with sun-worn skin and dark hair pulled into a tight braid, Carmen carried herself with practical confidence. She asked direct questions, not about obedience, but about resilience, about how the puppy reacted under stress, about what it needed, not what it could do. Ryan respected that, too. The day they left was quieter than he expected. No ceremony, no dramatic goodbyes, just movement, change. Nova watched each puppy go. She didn't panic. She didn't try to stop it. She followed them to the door, nose brushing gently against each one before stepping back. Ryan stood beside her, not interfering, not controlling, just present. The smallest puppy, the one who had nearly died, remained. Not because Ryan had decided it alone, because it made sense. Sarah had explained the need for continued monitoring, consistent care. But that wasn't the only reason. The puppy had already chosen. It followed Ryan more than the others, settled near him, trusted him in a way that didn't need to be taught. Ryan hadn't named it at first. He didn't rush that anymore. But one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the yard, the name came quietly. "Lumen," he said. The puppy looked up. That was enough. Weeks passed. The routine settled into something steady. Not controlled, not rigid, just consistent. Ryan's house, once quiet, isolated, carried new sounds now. Movement. Life. Sarah visited often at first, then less frequently. Not because she needed to, but because she trusted what she saw. One evening, she stayed longer than usual. They sat on the porch, watching Nova and Lumen move across the yard. The air was cool, but not cold. The kind of evening that didn't demand anything, just existed. "You're different," Sarah said after a while. Ryan glanced at her. "How?" She shrugged slightly. "You don't look like you're waiting for something to go wrong." Ryan considered that. For a long time he had. Every moment had been measured against what could fail, what he might miss, what he might lose. He looked out at the yard. Nova lay in the grass, head resting calmly, eyes half closed. Lumen moved nearby, exploring, stopping, returning without being called. Ryan exhaled slowly. "Maybe I stopped trying to control everything," he said. Sarah smiled faintly. "That's not easy." "No," Ryan agreed. "It's not. But it was possible. And that was enough." The gate at the edge of the yard remained open, not by accident, by choice. Lumen wandered toward it sometimes, stepping just beyond, then turning back on its own. Nova watched, but didn't intervene. Ryan didn't move either. He didn't need to, because some things didn't need to be held in place to stay. Some things stayed because they chose to. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan Carter understood the difference. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a coincidence. Because sometimes, when the world feels cold, when everything seems lost, God sends a sign. Not loud, not obvious, but quiet. Like a wounded dog in the snow, or a second chance you didn't think you deserved. Ryan didn't just save them that night. Maybe he was being saved too. So what do you think? Was this just fate? Or was it something greater? Do you believe God puts people, and even animals, into our lives for a reason? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional stories like this. Because sometimes, the smallest miracles leave the biggest marks.